perhaps we should start with what I thought was the biggest news last week, which was Microsoft's announcement around quantum computing. I feel like that definitely got the most buzz, even if it may not be the most directly important one for CIOs at the moment.
Well, I'm going to start by saying, well, actually, I do think it's an important topic for CIOs. It's just not an important near-term topic. But
Mhm.
I think it's way above my pay grade in trying to understand what the heck they're talking about. The entire quantum computing thing is one of those areas that if you're a CIO, you have to have your eye on it. If for no other reason than the ultimate risk to security protocols that quantum computing represents and being able to break encryption and potentially and what have you. I think there's also, especially with the dawn of AI, there's lots of potential for quantum computing could be the thing that sort of causes breakthroughs or enables things like AGI in terms of its computing power, which is why there's this push. So I think there's a few interesting parts to this story. And if you aren't following along, so Microsoft announced a new processor that they've been working on around quantum computing. And one of the things that made the big news is they supposedly have created, which I learned right, they didn't really create, but a novel particle, which is like
Yes. Hmm.
I think we're talking about any of this in the context of IT is bewildering to me. But this new particle that supposedly helped them solve some of the problems around quantum computing. So the two big things that were newsworthy or interesting. The first was this idea of a new particle, whatever that meant, and the second though that was Microsoft, because Microsoft is not someone that we historically have talked about in the context of quantum computing. And this is them sort of jumping onto the scene in a very big way. And I think more than anything else, if I put my CIO hat on, it sort of solidifies where Microsoft is going, the investments they're making, that they're looking very long term. I've always said that CIOs invest in vision, and vision takes a lot of forms, and this is one of them, right? Especially if you're a company like Microsoft is casting your net far into the future and inviting your customers to get on board with it. I thought it was interesting. So, I mean, you probably know more about this stuff than I do. I mean, what was your take on all of it?
You know me, I love nerding out on the science stuff. So, in case you haven't been keeping up with quantum computing, basically, this is a way to use atoms the same way that we think about bits and bytes. So, ones and zeros are what computing is made of. So, the big difference is that in quantum, we're using electrons often for to figure out based on the spin of the electron, whether that's a one or a zero. And then it gets really weird because electrons are really weird, protons are really weird, subatomic particles are really weird. And the super weird thing here is that Microsoft has been investing in this Majorana particle approach for almost 2 decades now. It's not easy to do. The Majorana particle is a super weird thing where it is two-dimensional, and it is and basically you have two bits on either side, and they can instantly transport to each other's positions because weird two-dimensional wave duality, things. But the idea is that you put one bit on the edge of one wire and then the other bit at the edge of another wire inside a transistor, and then you're able to basically flip those back and forth. And that's what Microsoft is saying that they're able to do. I mean, so fancy spancy. I'm not quite sure whether that's actually true or not. We haven't quite seen all of the scientific detail, but if this is true, Microsoft has a big advantage because this is an approach that can be repeated in more of a transistor or processor, microprocessor type approach, whereas everybody else is basically trying to trap atoms and make sure the atoms don't conflict with each other. And this is very hard to do, aligning individual atoms and line them up and not having them interfere with each other. Microsoft technically has a better way of doing this if they can show that this can scale. And as we all know, most of the quantum computing we've been seeing is 3 qubits, 5 qubits, 10 qubits, basically 10 bits. Because they're still trying to figure out the primary science on how this works. But we all know that if you can get to 100 or 1,000 of these and do that consistently, you start being able to crack basically any encryption or protect yourself against from any encryption attacks, one way or the other. So that's where it starts getting really interesting.
Yeah, and I know there was, as I said, way above my pay grade. I can't process most of this, but I know there was some pushback, I guess is the word, from some of the scientific community saying, "Hey, they haven't shown their work completely. We're not sure if this is really true." So I think it's just sort of one of those interesting data points, but something to keep your eye on that they have at the very least announced themselves as a player in this space that has been bubbling for a decade now,
Yeah, and IBM
and
has
has
made a
never
lot of
quite.
noise in this space as well. So I see that this is now, Microsoft and IBM now have their quantum approaches, and this is starting to become a real market instead of just these, onesie twosie, startups. Honestly,
And I do think it's interesting. I think to a certain extent, you said you went where I was sort of going. That the big loser in this is probably IBM, right? IBM has been sort of teetering on this point of struggling to find continued relevancy in the market. Lots of acquisitions, lots of stuff. They obviously still have lots of revenue, all of that. But we rarely talk about them, right? And we rarely talk about them because right now have been sort of relegated to building block sort of stuff. And the one exception to that has really been quantum computing. And so having a company like Microsoft, who on the converse is constantly in the press about AI and everything else, that, I think does not bode horribly well for IBM. But, all that said, I think we are still years, maybe even a decade from any of this to really coming to reality. So plenty of time for all of that to change.